The last calculation. A Dragon Ball Super Fic, Frieza, Tournament of Power. I did not decide to move. That is the first fact, and it unsettles me more than the second, which is that I am no longer in the ring. There is a particular indignity in being extracted from a battle mid-thought, the way one might yank a needle from a record, and leave the room ringing with the absence of music. One moment there was a wall of light wide enough to erase a lesser species from the concept of having existed, and the android was beneath it, and I was, elsewhere, apparently, doing something with my body that my mind had not been consulted on. Now I am standing on the observation platform, with the taste of ozone still coating the inside of my mouth, watching the arena continue without me, and I find that I cannot account for the half-second in which I chose, if chose is even the correct word, and I am no longer certain that it is, to place myself between an explosion and a machine I have no history with, no allegiance to, and no reason whatsoever to preserve. I am told this happens to lesser beings constantly. Instinct, they call it, as though that explains anything, rather than simply naming the mystery and declaring the matter closed. I have never in my long and meticulously curated life mistaken the naming of a thing for the understanding of it. I intend to understand this, so I stand at the rail, arms folded, robe settled back into its customary and correct lines, and I watch the tournament continue, and I begin, for what I believe is the first time in my existence, in earnest, without the usual contempt I reserve for the exercise, to think. Below, the Saiyan is screaming. It is not an elegant sound. Nothing about him has ever been elegant. He fights like something assembled by a child from spare parts, all momentum and appetite, and yet the sound he is making now as he rises from where the same blast that took me nearly took him is not the scream of pain, or even of rage in its purer form. I have heard him produce both, at great and tiresome length, across more decades than I care to number. This is different. This is a sound with something underneath it. The way a struck bell has a second, lower tone beneath the obvious one, audible only if you are listening for it. I am listening for it. The light that begins to gather around him is not gold. I have spent considerable effort acquiring gold, refining it out of my own flesh through a program of self-directed suffering so exact it might as well have been surgery, and I know precisely what that shade of triumph costs, and precisely what it looks like when achieved. This is not that. This is silver, and it does not blaze so much as it settles, the way frost settles, the way a decision settles. Once a person has stopped arguing with themselves about it, he goes quiet, his stance loosens into something almost conversational, and the being who has been dismantling every combatant in this tournament with the calm of a man doing arithmetic, that insufferable, granite-faced monolith from Universe 11, takes, for the first time since I have been made to watch him, one step back. I have seen this before. That is what unmoors me. Standing at the rail with my nails biting crescents into my own palms, I have seen this exact shape of event before, and I still do not understand it, and the not understanding has now happened so many times across so many years that I am forced to conclude the failure is not in the data, the failure is in me. 1. The first time, I did not even have the dignity of expecting it. Namek, that damp and overrated marble, cost me a hand and arm, half my face, and, though I would not have named it this way at the time, would sooner have opened my own chest with my thumbnail than admit it. My composure. I remember the specific sensation of it, because I have an excellent memory, and no interest in softening what it shows me. The low-class nothing, the third-string monkey. I had allotted perhaps 4 minutes of my attention before the day's proceedings, kneeling over the corpse of a friend so unremarkable I had genuinely forgotten I killed him, until the reaction made it relevant again, and something in the boy simply opened. That is the closest word I have. Opened, the way a door opens onto a room you did not know your own house contained. I called it a fluke for years. I called it a mutation, a glitch in the breeding stock, an aberration to be catalogued, and never repeated, because the alternative, that the single greatest escalation of power I had personally witnessed in my extraordinarily long life had been caused by grief, was not a conclusion I was equipped to file anywhere. I had no drawer for it. I still don't, if I am honest, though I am beginning to suspect the absence of the drawer is itself the finding. I rebuilt myself after Namek with machines, because machines do not require me to have wanted anything I could not simply purchase or command into being. Half a century in a chamber of my own design, every system replaced, every weakness itemized and engineered out of existence with the patience of a jeweler correcting a flaw in an otherwise perfect stone. When I emerged, gold and immaculate, and I believed, sincerely believed, finally beyond the reach of whatever had happened to that boy on that field, I told myself I had achieved the same thing he had. Transcendence. Evolution. The next stage. I had not. I had achieved the same destination, perhaps, by an entirely different road, and I have come, standing at this rail with the smell of my own scorched robe still in my nostrils, to suspect that the road is the entire point and I have simply never been able to see it. The way a man born without a particular sense cannot be argued into perceiving the color he is missing. I built my gold. He was handed as by the collapse of something he loved. Mine required no loss whatsoever, and it shows. I say this with no self-pity, merely accuracy, in how much thinner mine has always been. 2. I told myself the boy was the anomaly and the man was the explanation, because the man, at least, made a kind of sense to me. Vegeta I could parse, or believed I could. Pride is a currency I deal in fluently. I have built an empire on the precise mechanics of humiliation, and the fury it produces, and when the prince finally clawed his way to that same impossible blue against me, years later, on that ludicrous provincial planet he had adopted as home, I told myself, there, ambition, a prince who cannot bear a lesser bloodline, outpacing him. This I understand, but pride alone has never, in the whole grinding history of my dealings with proud men, produced that. I have humiliated generals into madness. I have watched ambitious men claw at power with their bare hands until the hands were ruined, and the power still did not come, because ambition is combustible, but it is not, on its own, sufficient fuel. It burns hot and it burns out, and I have built a career on outlasting it in others. What the prince had was not merely wounded pride, it had a shape to it that pride does not have alone. It had, underneath the fury, something disgustingly, unmistakably domestic, a woman I am told he tolerates with something approaching devotion, a child, a home, God's help me, an actual structure with a roof that he apparently returns to, and is, in some fashion, I still find faintly nauseating to contemplate, anchored by. He was not fighting to prove himself superior to a memory of me. He was fighting because something in him had calculated, correctly, that he had something to lose, and had then done the astonishing, illogical thing of leaning into that fact rather than excising it. I would have excised it. I did excise it, long before either of these men were born, though at the time I would not have described the procedure in those terms. I would have called it good sense. 3. Here is where the thinking becomes difficult, and I notice, with the same detached, cataloging interest I would apply to a malfunction in one of my own ships, that I am reluctant to continue it. That reluctance is itself data. I proceed regardless. I had a father. I had a brother. I had, at the absolute height of my dominion, more soldiers under my banner than most galaxies have stars, and I could have any one of them killed at breakfast and replaced by lunch without the arithmetic of my empire noticing the transaction. This was not cruelty for its own sake, whatever the histories written by the vermin who survived me might prefer to believe. It was architecture. I understood, long before I could have articulated why, that an empire built on people you could not bear to lose was an empire with a leash around its own neck, and I had resolved, somewhere in a childhood I do not particularly enjoy revisiting, that I would never be led anywhere by anything. My father did not love me. I do not say this with grievance, I say it the way one notes a specification. He respected capacity and discarded its absence, and I was raised inside that logic so completely that by the time I was old enough to consider whether I might want something else, the wanting itself had already been bred nearly out of the line, the way a trait is bred out of livestock, not through cruelty exactly, simply through generations of selecting against it. My brother was a rival before he was ever anything else, and I dispatched him, eventually, with the same emotional whether I would apply to recalibrating a scouter. I do not believe I have ever, in the totality of my existence, stood next to another living creature, and felt the specific vertigo of understanding that its absence would cost me something I could not simply rebuild. I made myself unbreakable by making certain there was nothing in reach that could break me. It is, I will note even now, an excellent strategy. It has kept me alive and ascendant across an incomprehensible span of years, while empires with softer architecture burn themselves down around their own attachments. I do not regret it. I want that stated plainly, even here, even now, in the privacy of my own skull where no one is grading my composure. I do not regret it, but I am beginning to understand. Watching a silver light steady itself over an arena I no longer stand in, that I purchased my invulnerability with the exact currency that produces this, whatever this is. I removed the wound so thoroughly that I also removed whatever it is that grows back stronger across the scar. I do not have scars. I have replacements. There is, I am forced to concede, a difference, and the difference has apparently been the entire answer this whole time, sitting in plain view, insulting me with its simplicity. 4. I have, out of what I can only describe as scientific thoroughness, tested the alternative explanations, because I distrust any conclusion arrived at too easily, and this one arrived very easily indeed, which made me suspicious of it rather than convinced. It is not merely a Saiyan biological quirk, some crude cellular trick, where the body rebuilds itself denser after near annihilation, the way I am told certain of their kind do after a sufficiently violent beating. I have watched fighters from realities I did not know existed a season ago do the same trembling, staggering, get up again routine on this platform, from species with no shared ancestry, no shared physiology, nothing biologically Saiyan about them whatsoever, and in a handful of cases, a maddeningly small handful, but present, undeniable, the same silver settling has threatened to occur in them too, in the instant before someone they stood beside was struck down. So it is not the blood. That hypothesis is closed. It is not, either, the simple mathematics of adversity, the crude notion that suffering alone manufactures strength if the dosage is sufficiently severe, because if that were the whole of it I would be the most transcendent being in any universe currently under threat of erasure, and I am demonstrably not, and I have the evidence of my own biography to prove it. I have died. I want to be precise about this, because I notice a temptation in myself to soften the word into something more survivable, and I will not permit it. I did not nearly die. I did not brush against death the way these creatures are so fond of describing their scrapes. I was cut in two by a child with a sword, and I ceased, entirely, to exist as a living thing, for long enough that the universe closed the file on me, and I was retrieved from that condition only because men found my remains, and machinery restored what a blade had ended. That is the single largest catastrophe adversity can inflict upon a body. It is the final exam of the theory, and I came back exactly the same. Not colder, I was already as cold as I knew how to be. Not stronger in any sense that did not require additional training I purchased afterward with time and effort. The same currency as before, spent the same way as before. I came back as precisely the being who had died, restored like a document from a backup, with nothing whatsoever added by the experience of having been erased. If loss alone produced this silver stillness I am watching settle over the arena below, my own death should have produced it 100 times over. It did not, which means the mechanism is not the losing. It is what a creature does with the wound once it has one. And I begin to suspect, with the particular nausea of a man watching his own foundations get reclassified as rubble, that a creature requires something worth wounding for the wound to matter at all, and I have spent my entire existence in the deliberate, disciplined, extraordinarily successful project of making sure nothing was. 5. The Saiyan below has stopped screaming. That is the detail I did not expect, and it is the one that finally cracks something loose in my chest that I would very much prefer had stayed cemented. I anticipated fury, the same crude combustible fuel I have watched drive him for decades, the roar and the wasteful, showy escalation. Instead, there is a stillness in him now that I recognize with a jolt of something close to vertigo, because it is the exact stillness I have spent my entire life performing, the composure, the economy of motion, the sense of a being who has stopped needing to convince anyone of anything. I built that stillness out of contempt, a wall constructed brick by brick to keep the universe at a distance where it could not touch me. He has arrived at what looks, from this railing, like the identical structure, and he did not build it by keeping anything at a distance. He built it, as far as I can piece together, by letting everything as close as it is possible for a creature to let anything, and simply continuing anyway afterward, when the closeness cost him what it was always going to cost him. Mine is a wall. His is a scar that learned to hold weight. I find this distinction unbearable in a way I have no vocabulary suited to, because I am not equipped, was never equipped, deliberately went to considerable lifelong effort to ensure I would never be equipped, with whatever apparatus converts a wound into that particular architecture. I have wounds. I have an extraordinary catalogue of them, several of them administered by the very bloodline currently rewriting the rules of the universe in front of me. But a wound in me simply closes. It does not become load-bearing. It becomes, at most, a grudge, and a grudge is a poor foundation. I know this now, watching it. A grudge is the architecture of a man who intends to spend his strength making someone else hurt the way he hurt, which is not at all the same project as the strange, silver, terrifyingly serene thing occurring below me, which appears to want nothing from anyone. It has simply decided to continue, the way weather continues, indifferent to whether it is watched. I envy it. I will permit myself that word exactly once, here, where no one can hear me concede it, and then I will retire the word permanently, because envy is itself an admission that I am hungry for something I cannot purchase, engineer, or conquer into being, and I have built my entire self-conception on the premise that there is no such category of thing. 6. Very well. If the door does not open for me, and I have now tested this proposition across enough decades, enough deaths, enough carefully engineered gold to consider the matter settled beyond further appeal, then I will stop standing in front of it. There is a certain dignity in recognizing when a path is permanently closed and redirecting one's considerable resources toward a path that is not, and I did not survive this long by sentimentally continuing to knock on doors that have made their answer plain. I cannot be broken open the way they are broken open, because breaking open requires that there be something inside worth the exposure, and I disassembled that architecture in myself so long ago and so thoroughly that I am not entirely certain the raw materials still exist to rebuild it, even if I wish to. Which, I want this stated with complete clarity, even now, even in the privacy of this thought, I do not. I have watched what it costs. I have watched it in real time, on a platform I was quite literally blasted off of for reasons I still cannot fully account for, and the not being able to account for it is precisely the vulnerability I refuse to reintroduce into a system I spent an empire perfecting. But I have also, for the first time in a life defined by never needing to change, been made to sit with proof that my method has a ceiling. And that the ceiling is not a technological one, not a training regimen I have simply failed to complete, not a transformation I have simply not yet discovered the correct posture for. It is a structural ceiling, built into the foundation, and no amount of additional gold applied to the surface will raise it. That is an intolerable piece of information to possess, and I intend to do something about it, because doing something about intolerable information is the entire discipline my existence has been organized around. If I cannot grow the way a wound grows, I will become something a wound cannot find purchase on at all. Not armor. I have worn armor, technological and biological both, and I have watched armor fail. Because armor is a fixed shape, and fixed shapes eventually meet the one force calibrated to their exact dimensions. I require something else, something with no fixed shape for the universe to eventually solve. I require the removal, systematic and total, of every remaining inefficiency in myself that still resembles wanting, the theater, the taunting, the appetite for an audience to witness my superiority, the small vain hungers that have cost me more battles than any Saiyans' fists ever have, because every one of them is a door I left unlocked out of nothing more than vanity. I do not need to be loved into strength, as they apparently are. I do not need loss, since loss has demonstrably done nothing for me, but interrupt my schedule. What I need is to become so entirely without unguarded surface that the question of what could break me stops having an answer. Not because I have hardened against the answer, but because I have removed the premise the question depends on, colder than I have ever been. Not the cold of contempt, which is loud, which postures, which wants an audience for its own superiority. I see now, with real and unwelcome clarity, how much of what I called strength was simply performance wearing strength's clothing. Something quieter than that, something with no need to be witnessed at all, which will make it, I suspect, very nearly impossible to see coming. Below, the light is fading from silver back into some merely gold, merely mortal, and the granite-faced monolith who has not taken a backward step in this entire tournament is on the ground. I turn from the rail before the crowd's noise reaches me, because I have no interest in what the moment feels like to the creatures cheering it, and because I have already extracted everything from the moment that concerns me. I did not come to this tournament to be instructed. I came to be revived, to collect on a wager cynically made and, I will note, with the first genuine and entirely private amusement I have felt all day, cynically won regardless of what it has cost me to sit here and think. But I find I am leaving with more than the wager paid me for. I have spent an existence certain that I was already the finished article, perfect, final, requiring no further correction, since correction is what lesser things require, and I have never in any meaningful sense been lesser. I understand now, standing very still at the edge of a battlefield I no longer belong to, watching a light I will never be able to summon fade back down into an unremarkable, exhausted man, that I was correct about being finished in exactly the way a blade is finished the moment it leaves the forge. Sharp, yes, complete in form, and entirely incapable of becoming sharper by any means except being ground down further against something harder than itself. Very well, I know now what I am not, and I have never in my life required anything more than that to begin constructing what I will become instead. Let them keep their scars and their silver light and whatever aches in them that apparently converts, given enough love, and enough loss, and enough sheer bloody-minded willingness to be broken and rise anyway. Into power I will never be handed by any wound of my own. I do not need their door. I am going to build a colder one, with no handle on the inside for anything to ever reach through, and when I am finished, it will not matter in the slightest what any of them are capable of becoming. It will only matter that I am no longer the same thing I was standing at this rail an hour ago. That is the last calculation I intend to run on the subject. I have my answer. I have no further use for the question.